Hello, and thank you for your interest in Language Cert, an approved SELT provider for the UK government. My name's Janet Golding, and today I'll be talking to you about how to prepare for your C1 listening, reading, writing and speaking exam. So first, I'll be giving you some information about the exam, then moving on to how you can prepare for it, and then give you some helpful advice on what to expect on exam day in the SELT Centre. Finally, I'll give you some other useful information that will help you prepare for your exam. Right, okay, let's start by looking at some information about your C1 exam. So, first of all, there are two components that you need to take. A written one, which consists of listening, reading and writing, and a spoken one, where you do some speaking tasks. You can take these components in any order, on different days if you want, but you must take them both within 14 days. This is a SELT requirement. You will receive your results 5 working days after taking both components, and you can book your exams online up to 24 hours before an exam. You take both components at a Language Cert SELT test centre, and we have a number of those everywhere. So you can choose from different locations, dates and times. So choose the best for your own situation and preference. Okay, you take both components online in the test centre using a computer, in fact, and headphones. And your spoken component is a short online interview with a live Language Cert interlocutor, so it's done in real time. You are examined individually on your own, and in the written component, you complete the listening tasks and then you move on to the reading and writing activities. Both components, the written and the spoken, have topics and tasks based on practical experience and everyday situations. Okay, now let's look at both components in a little bit more detail. So first, the written component. So if you have a look at this slide, on the left, you can see some information, key information about the listening part. And for your level, C1, it's a 30-minute test and you hear each part twice. If you look on the right-hand side now at the red box titled listening, you'll see in this listening section, you have 4 parts and in fact 26 questions to answer. These can be multiple choice or gap filling. And in the reading and writing, if you look back to the box on the left, you have to do both reading and writing in one uninterrupted session, which lasts 2 hours and 40 minutes. If you look back to the right, there's some more information about the reading. So there are 4 parts and 26 questions, and there will be multiple choice, text types, gap filling, and multiple matching. And you will need to do 2 writing tasks. One is a formal piece of writing, and that means you need to write between 200 and 250 words, and an informal piece of writing between 250 and 300 words. Okay, now let's look a little bit more at the spoken component. It's a 1-to-1 test in 4 parts, and it takes 15 minutes. Your We say one-to-one because you're examined on your own, so not in pairs, which means you can talk on your own with the examiner, the interlocutor that we call them, and they're friendly and welcoming, and you can show exactly what you can really do with your English. Because your interlocutor is with you live for the whole test, they can walk you through and work with you closely the 4 different parts, which we can see here. Don't forget, by the way, you'll be wearing headphones for this exam. The first part is where you talk about personal information, you give your ideas and opinions, and then you move on to part 2, where you take part in role plays, situational role plays. Then you move on to part 3, where you take part in an interactive task with the interlocutor, where you exchange information and opinions with them. Then you move on to the 4th part. This is where you give a long turn on your own about a topic, and the topic is actually chosen by the interlocutor. Okay, now let's have a look at each part of the 4-skill exam and think about how to prepare for each part. So we'll start with the listening at C1, and you get ready for this part of the exam by having a look, first of all, in the qualification handbook. That's the best document to start with, to be honest. So if you look at the ESOL Listening, Reading, Writing Qualification Handbook, it's on our website, and within that document you will see everything about the format, the features, the can-do listening skills descriptions, the topics you might encounter, functions and grammar. And you need to get to know the listening exam task. So this is why I'm going to show you some samples in a moment, and also some helpful information for you on how to prepare. After that, it will be extremely useful if you then have a look at more examples of the tasks by consulting our practice papers on our website. Okay, now let's have a look at an example of listening part 1. If you have a look here, you'll hear some short conversations in this part. Don't forget, you hear them twice. Each conversation will be heard twice, and you then choose the correct answer to complete each conversation. So here you have some examples, and you have a choice of A, B, or C. Have a look at those just for a moment. And as I said, you will see more examples like this on our website and sample scripts, transcripts, so that can also help you to practice. Okay, and then part 2 is where, again, you'll hear some conversations, you'll hear them twice, and in this task, you will choose correct answers for the conversations, like the ones you can see here. And in the actual exam, you will hear 3 conversations. So here you've just got a sample of 2 of those. And again, you can see you've got a choice between A, B, or C, so multiple choice. Only one answer will be the correct one. Okay, and then the third part for the listening is where you listen to somebody talking, you hear the person twice, and you complete the information on this pad. You need to write short answers of between 1 to 5 words. That's very important. And you'll see here there are 5 pieces of information to complete. In the actual exam, you will have 7. Okay, now in the last part of the listening, part 4, you will hear a conversation. Again, you'll hear it twice, and you choose the correct answers. And it will be something like this, something where you have multiple choice again, as you can see here, and you choose from 3 options. Only one is correct. Okay, now moving on to some helpful information for preparing for the listening tasks. So before listening, you might want to follow these suggestions. So do plenty of timed practice using the practice papers on our website. The more you get used to the timings, the more confident you'll be in the exam. When you're practicing, be as positive and calm as you can and fully focused on your tasks. Read any instructions very carefully. So, for example, if you're asked to complete gaps with a certain number of words, try to stick to the word limit you're given. Read questions and answer choices to predict the context and to understand the listening purpose of the task. Always focus on keywords and questions because that will help you remember what to focus on. Remember, the information asked usually follows the same order as the information provided. Pay attention to any heading you see, like in part 3, as it's a most useful summary for you of what you're about to hear. And again, it could give you some confidence as well. Okay, now during listening in the exam, focus on the gist. So that is to say, try to understand the general meaning. Pay attention to the speaker's stress or intonation. This might help you find the correct answer. Listen and choose an answer even if you're not quite sure about it. Prepare for the next question. This will make you feel ready for what will follow and you'll be more confident. Don't be put off by unknown words. Try to guess them from the context. After you've done the listening part of the test, make sure you've answered all the questions. If you can't decide on the right choice, follow a process of elimination. So cross out the choices which seem to be irrelevant. And check once more if you produced the number of words allowed. Okay, now let's move on to reading. So to get ready for your reading, again, it's a really good idea to get familiar with the qualification handbook on our website. So that's the listening, reading, writing qualification handbook. And you'll see in there all the format information, features, the can-do reading skills descriptions, the topics, functions and grammar for C1. Getting to know the reading exam tasks will really help you. So that's why we're going to look at some samples in a moment and some suggestions on how you can prepare successfully. Then afterwards, try and give yourself some time to look at more examples of reading tasks in our practice papers. Okay, so let's have a look at those reading 4 parts and some samples here. So on this slide, you can see a sample of part 1, and this is where you need to read a text. And then on the right, you can see there are some statements that are true according to the text and some are false. So you need to choose the correct answer for each statement. Okay, let's have a look now at part 2. In part 2, you've got your text, you can see on the left, and you've got sentences on the right. The text has missing information, missing sentences, so you use the sentences on the right to complete the text. And there are 2 extra sentences that you won't need. So you're matching the missing sentences with the correct parts of the text, if you like. Okay, now let's look at part 3. In part 3, you will have some text, so you've got text A, B, C, and D on the left, and you have to decide which text does something, which text will help you find the answer to the questions on the right. So, for example, in which text does the writer advise readers of precautionary measures, for example? And which text is saying the following: a protective cover is free of charge. So you're working to match those questions with the correct texts on the left. Okay, now let's have a look at part 4. And here you see a longer text on the left and some questions, and you've got to use a maximum of 5 words to complete each question. So be very aware of that and don't go over 5 words, for example. All right, so that's just a sample of 4 different parts, and you can get more examples of these 4 different parts when you look at the practice papers on our website. Okay, now here's some hints and tips for you for when you're preparing and for when you're actually in the exam. So first of all, before the exam day, when you're doing reading practice, remember the main features of the reading exam: the text types, the question types that will come up, and the usual focus of text. This will help you be more comfortable, more confident in the exam. You can find this information in the handbook, qualification handbook, and of course in the practice papers. And be very comfortable and familiar with the different strategies to help you understand a reading text, like skimming and scanning, predicting and confirming predictions, guessing, helped by the title. All these things will help you be more effective and efficient in your reading, in general actually, as well as in the exam. And then while you're preparing, think of linking words and look at them in your text and think of their role. What do they do? What's their job in the text that you've got in front of you? And this should also help you when you are reading in the exam. Okay, during the exam, when you're doing the reading tasks, read the instructions very carefully and don't rush. You've got enough time to do these tasks, so don't panic. Read through the instructions very carefully. Read the title, if there is one, because that will help you. It's like a summary telling you what the content is of the text that follows. And then start by reading the text once to get the main idea. This will help you find information if you roughly know where it is. Don't waste your time trying to understand the meaning of any new words in the text. Try to understand their meaning through the sentences that come before or after them. Read the questions carefully. They may guide you as to the content of the text. And focus on key ideas and key words. They will help you remember which points are raised, where you can find them. Some more useful information for you, some suggestions for effective reading during the exam. Remember, answers do not always lift words from the text, so you need to paraphrase. Don't just copy words. Remember that information you read usually follows the same order as the information requested through the questions we ask you. Select an answer, even if you're not sure of it. Divide your time equally between reading and writing tasks. You don't want to spend so long, let's say, on your writing that you run out of time to do your reading. Always keep an eye on the time. If you can't answer a question, carry on and come back to it later. In the case of a text with removed sentences, first try to understand the general meaning of the text and then read the provided options. Okay, after you've finished reading, still reread the text and confirm your answers. If there are any unanswered questions remaining, put some answer, even if you're not quite sure it's the right one. Remember, there cannot be more than one correct answer to any multiple choice questions. Okay, now let us move on to preparing for the writing part. So, as you can imagine, the qualification handbook that we've been mentioning so far is very helpful also when you're preparing for writing. You can find out the can-do writing skills descriptions, as well as the format and features, the topics that might come up, certainly the functions of grammar you need to try to use. Get to know the writing exam tasks. So that's why we're going to look at some samples here and some helpful suggestions for how to prepare. But I would strongly suggest afterwards that you then look at more samples of writing tasks, particularly in the practice papers on our website. Okay, so let's have a look at part 1 and part 2. Remember, there are 2 tasks in the writing. So here's a sample of part 1 at this level. This could be the question you're asked to do. So you read the following 2 extracts in your local newspaper. Write a letter to the editor commenting on the 2 views and expressing your own opinion. So you've got 2 extracts there. And then your letter needs to be between 150 and 200 words. Okay, now let's have a look at a sample of part 2. You recently read the following quotation: "Actions speak louder than words." Write a letter to your best friend explaining how this quotation made you feel and describing an occasion on which it inspired you. So for this piece of writing, you need to write a letter, and it has to be between 250 and 300 words. And as I mentioned earlier, you can see plenty of other samples of writing tasks for this level in the practice tests, in the practice papers on our website. Okay, so some helpful information when you're preparing for writing. Before exam day, Be very sure, be very familiar and aware of the text types that you need to be able to show at your level and their key features. And you'll see these both in the handbook and the practice papers. Prepare for these different text types by doing the writing tasks in our practice papers. That's a good way for you to really tackle the typical topics we ask you about. And also don't forget to time yourself so that you can get a good idea of how long to leave yourself for the writing tasks and how long it typically takes you to write that amount of words. And on the subject of words, do produce the required amount, even when you're practicing, to get into a good habit. Write within the word count so that when you're in the exam, you'll be doing it naturally. Okay. In the exam, when you're doing your writing tasks, do show a range of everything, and particularly a range of the grammar of the level. Carefully read the topic and think of the grammar to be used. Remember who your intended audience is, because that will also affect which grammar you use. On the side of vocabulary, use the more complex vocabulary you know, not the simple basic stuff. Use the vocabulary that reflects your level. Show what you know, so not the easiest words that come to mind. Avoid generic words and replace them with more descriptive or specific ones. And you've got some examples here. Don't forget about your paragraphing, so organise your text into paragraphs, and remember each paragraph should consist of at least 2 to 3 sentences. Remember to use a topic sentence to introduce what will be discussed in the next lines and supporting sentences that provide further information. Also, don't forget that a paragraph usually closes with the concluding sentence that summarises the information you've just presented. Use linking words and know their meaning, use and position in a sentence. Try to use different ones, so vary them. Don't use the same ones all the time. Use a good range. And plan to finish early so you've got a chance to go over your written work and proofread it. So that's in the next bit after writing. Proofread your work, check for repetitions, if you've forgotten any words, if you need to make any necessary corrections, if you made a spelling mistake, a punctuation mistake or something. Leave time to do some proofreading. Try to remember the kind of mistakes you usually make and see if you've made similar ones. Okay, now the other thing you have to prepare for is the speaking component. So let's have a look at this. So get ready for speaking by looking at the dedicated speaking qualification handbook on our website. You can see in there the format, the features, the can-do speaking skills descriptions, the topics that you may need to speak about, functions and grammar you need to use to show you really are C1 level, and so on. Get to know the speaking exam tasks. Be happy, be confident about them. So look at the samples here and then the suggestions I'm going to give on how to prepare. But also, when you've got some more time, look at the additional samples in our practice papers on our website. Okay, let's look at each part now. Here's a sample of part 1. Don't forget, part 1 takes 3 minutes. And the interlocutor starts and they ask you these questions. So, can you spell your family name for me, please? And which country are you from? Then they ask you some questions about different topics. So in fact, they will ask you up to 5 questions, one from each of a set of different topic areas. So you have some examples here. There is one topic area, and I'm going to show you 4 others in a moment. So here we've got parental responsibilities. So the interlocutor might ask you, what do you think is the most important feature of a good parent? And if you have a look on the next slide, they will most likely ask you one question from each of these. Don't forget the topics can vary. This is just an example. So do have a look at the practice papers and the handbook as well for the range of topics. So here we've got money management. So they might ask you what might be the main disadvantage of having a lot of money. Superstitions, they might ask you, why do people believe in superstitions? For space exploration, they might ask you, how would you feel if you travelled in outer space? Music might come up and they might ask you, how much does your mood affect the music you listen to? Okay, so that's a sample of part 1. Now let's have a look at part 2. So the role plays. The 3-minute part 2 task covers at least 2 role plays. So the interlocutor can say, we're going to role play some situations and I want you to start to respond. And in fact, the interlocutor will choose the situations for you. So they might choose for the first role play, the 3rd one in this list we have here. So they might say, we're neighbours. I live next door. I start. Your child's football has made a mark on my fence again. And then you answer. The conversation continues for at least 2 turns each. Okay, and then here's an example for the second type of situation. So again, the interlocutor chooses it. So they might say to you, we're best friends. I've just told you I've been made redundant. You start. So you would start, and then the conversation again continues for at least 2 turns each. Just be aware that if there's enough time, the interlocutor might choose another situation. So don't worry about that. It's quite normal procedure. Be ready for that too. Okay. So here is a sample for part 3, which takes 4 minutes. And in this particular sample, the interlocutor would introduce what you're doing by saying, we're going to discuss something together, and they will show you your task sheet. Then they will continue. So they would say here in this example, here are some views about the effect of technology on our lives. Let's discuss the views and decide which ones we most agree with and which we least agree with. Take 20 seconds to think about what you want to say. So you would think for about 20 seconds, and then don't worry about that. The interlocutor will tell you when to start, and they will obviously say, please start. And here you've got an example of a task sheet for this type of task. Okay, now part 4. Let's have a look at a sample for part 4. Part 4 takes 5 minutes, including follow-up questions. And in this part, the interlocutor will ask you to talk about something for 2 minutes. They again choose for you. So they might have these 3 choices. So for example, they might choose B. So they would say, You're going to talk about something for 2 minutes. Your topic is a time when unexpected weather conditions made you alter your plans. They then tell you this information. You now have 30 seconds to write some notes to help you. So your topic is a time when unexpected weather conditions made you alter your plans. Then you have 30 seconds to think about this topic and make some notes. After that, the interlocutor that is, will say, please start. Then you talk for 2 minutes. And then after that, the interlocutor will ask you some follow-up questions. So let's have a look at some of those for topic B. So they might say to you, in what ways do you think weather and our mood are connected? Or they might ask, which country do you think has the perfect weather? Why? Okay, so you get a number of different questions they might ask you. Okay, that's the end of the set of samples. Let's move on to some advice to help you prepare. So before exam day, before you do the speaking part of the test, think about these things maybe in no particular order. But while you're preparing for part 4, so the long term that we've just looked at, practice speaking for a short amount of time initially, and then gradually increase the duration up to the specified time you need to speak. This will give you more confidence and make you feel more natural sounding when you do it in the exam. Learn to express what you have to say with reasons, evidence, personal experiences. You've got to back up why you have a particular opinion. If you realise you're making a few grammatical mistakes, don't worry, just carry on. Don't interrupt the flow of your oral response. While you're practicing before exam day, if you're not happy with what you're producing, again, keep talking. Try to be more fluent next time, and you'll do better. Practice makes perfect, as you know. Remember, listening is half of your spoken communication. And being fluent in a language is often the result of listening to a lot of different things. So do practice that and work on listening to programs on the television, radio, listen to songs, in this case, in English. Okay, and then while you're in the exam, try to use advanced vocabulary of C1 level. Show what you know at this level. Avoid generic words. Instead, use more descriptive ones. If you can't remember a word, just say it in another way, paraphrase it. That's fine. It's actually part of normal, effective communication when you're speaking. Avoid repetitions as far as possible, so use synonyms, paraphrase, and so on. Try to present your ideas as logically as possible. You might find it helpful to signpost the direction of your thoughts using words like first of all, then, finally. It goes without saying that you need to try to always speak clearly. Organise your thoughts before answering questions, especially in part 2 and part 3, because you're following on from what the interlocutor is saying. You need to be appropriate, relevant, show you've understood, be meaningful. Use the appropriate language or tone depending on the role that you are given. So in part 2 in the role play, or in part 3 in that discussion. And try to keep hesitations and pauses to a minimum. So resort to fillers to fill in your silent gaps. So words like, well, now let me think, I mean, or you know. Obviously don't overdo it. Don't just say, I mean or you know every time you speak. Okay. Now, let's move on to some pointers for exam day itself. So you must arrive at the SELT test centre 30 minutes before the start time of your test. You need to complete the necessary sign-in procedures. Don't forget to bring the same valid photo ID or passport that you used to register for your exam. And you leave your belongings in a locker. You will be directed to the locker by the test centre staff because bags, mobile phones and other personal items are not allowed into the exam room. Breaks are not allowed during your exam. And if you have any questions before you start the test, ask the friendly staff in the centre. They're really nice and helpful. And if you're doing the exam itself, you're taking part in the exam, you can ask the interlocutor if you have questions, if you need something to be repeated or clarified, for example. Okay, let's just move on to a bit more information that should help you prepare better. So, we have a lot of useful support and information on our website. Particularly, that's where you will find the speaking qualification handbook and the listening, reading, writing qualification handbook. As previously mentioned, they're very, very helpful documents. There's a qualification overview which might help you, and those all-important practice papers. There are FAQs with some really good answers, which should resolve most of the things or all of the things you might be thinking about, and other resources to help you too. Make the use of all of them. Okay, and then in fact, if you have questions at any time, please do contact our customer service team because they are always happy to help you. Okay, now you have heard from me and you've listened to this session about preparing for your listening, reading, writing, speaking SELT exam. If you've got further queries, please visit us on our website at this address, or you can email us at this address. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for your time today, and I wish you all the luck in the world for your exam. Goodbye for now, though.